Hi, Deepika. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We have a very special guest today, Sanjoy Roy from Teamwork Arts. And as we were chatting right now, people said, my God, what impressive credentials you have, Sanjoy. And truly, your resume reads like, really something. So, Teamwork Arts and Sanjoy have been instrumental in promoting Indian performances and Indian art all over the world. And in fact, it reads like a list. It's like reading out the atlas. They've had festivals all over the world in 40 cities, including Australia, Canada, in countries like Australia, Canada, Egypt, France, Germany, Hong Kong, etc., etc. Just read the atlas and they're there. And apart from that, Sanjoy has received the National Award for Excellence and Best Director for his film Shah Jahanabad. He's the founder trustee of Salam Balak Trust, which we will talk about later. And Salam Balak Trust has also received the US President's Award from the White House. Sanjoy holds several prestigious cultural positions like co-chair of FICCI, and he's advisor to the Arts Council of the England Diversity Board of Theatre. He's lectured in many universities like Western Australia, Durban, Brisbane, Houston, Columbia College, London School of Economics. It goes on and on. Wow, Sanjoy. So this is absolutely an honor to have you here, Sanjoy. There was a video I wanted to show, so I might want to share it. No, it's about all the festivals that you, one second, let me try.
Teamwork Arts, bringing India to the world and the world to India through Indian art and culture for over 30 years. One of Teamwork Arts' signature events, the Z Jaipur Literature Festival, is the world's largest free festival of its kind. With daily interactive sessions, lively debate and dialogue, and international music performances every night, it's no wonder the festival attracts over 500,000 visitors a year. The Jaipur Bookmark, an international B2B event for the publishing industry, happens during the Z Jaipur Literature Festival and sees a confluence of publishers, writers, and literary agents. Teamwork Arts, producers of the Z Jaipur Literature Festival, have taken the flavor of the festival to international shores with vibrant events in the UK, Australia, and the US. Teamwork Arts takes India's artistic diversity to the world with almost 12 festivals of India across continents in a stunning array in over 40 cities. A feast for the senses, these are spectacles of dance, music, cinema, theatre, literature, and so much more. In each of these places, Teamwork Arts' colourful festivals of India are the high points of the annual cultural calendars, be it Confluence in Australia, India by the Bay in Hong Kong, India by the Nile in Egypt, Iron India in Chicago, Shared History in South Africa, India in the Sunshine City in Zimbabwe, Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Kala Utsavam in Singapore, Sarang in South Korea, festivals in Abu Dhabi, Shanghai, Sweden. The list is dizzying. The Jazz India Circuit is an endeavour by Teamwork Arts to spread the word and sound of jazz across the country. The 2017-18 season, 4 festivals across 3 cities featuring over 25 stellar artists from India and around the world, including Jojo Mayer and Nerve, drummer-singer Jameson Ross, and Dave Weckl, who collaborated with the talented Mohini Day. The Mahindra Kabira Festival celebrates the spirit, lyric and verse of the 15th century mystic poet Kabir in his birthplace, the historic city of Varanasi. Kabir's poetry is about inclusiveness. Mahindra Kabira brings to music lovers an unforgettable experience of listening to leading exponents of the classical Banaras Gharana and rich folk traditions of music on the legendary banks of the mighty river Ganges, along with sessions on art and literature, specially curated walks with famous local residents and delectable local cuisine. Sacred celebrates the spiritual through music and its ability to heal. International artists collaborate with world music exponents from India amongst the most incredible desert settings on the banks of the Pushkar Lake. Heritage walks, meditation, talks, and workshops are part of this weekend experience. Teamwork also promotes and recognizes the best of Indian theatre through the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards. The Meta Week in Delhi is an enthralling showcase of the 10 best nominated plays shortlisted from numerous entries received from across the country and across languages. The Meta Lifetime Achievement Award has been presented to leading lights of India's theatre industry. For the young and the young at heart, the Ishara International Puppet Theatre Festival brings local and international performances to audiences across several Indian cities. While the Multi-City Kahani Festival features interactive storytelling sessions and workshops championing the power of imagination. Bollywood Love Story, a musical. Our international touring productions such as Bollywood Extravaganza and Flamenco India have sold out shows across Europe, Egypt, Russia and Spain. Expressions International Contemporary Dance Festival showcases Indian and international productions bringing together several dance genres for Indian audiences. Teamwork Arts, celebrating the arts. For more information, visit www.teamworkarts.com.
So, before I hand it over, just tell us, how did all this begin? How did Teamwork Arts get into this entire thing?
Thank you, Deepika. Hope we can all see you all physically at some point of time at the Jaipur Literature Festival. So, Deepika, as perhaps many of you don't know, Deepika was pretty much one of our first colleagues in Teamwork way back in the mid-80s. And the reason why we began this company at that point of time was really to provide employment for all our colleagues in theatre. We were all part of Theatre Action Group, which was our artistic director was Barry John. I was the executive director. And our whole thing was, how do we find employment for all our colleagues who work in theatre, but they needed to make money as well. So we set up a company to do television and film. So in the first 4 or 5 years of our existence, we were primarily a television and film company. And we used to do, initially we used to do a lot of social films for people like UNICEF and VHAI and the Ministry of Health, etc. Awareness films about everything from diarrhea to tuberculosis and more. And Deepika remembers those days.
Because I was invariably forced to act in those films, and I was handed some little baby from the village, and I was supposed to be the nurse who was, giving the baby the medicines, etc., etc. And now I tell Sanjoy, when I was working with you guys, we went and shot in some awful village behind Delhi. Now you guys travel all over the world after I have left. No, but seriously, I have to tell you this, as a member of Barry's theatre group TAG, I was so happy to be part of Teamwork, because I could actually continue with my theatre. Otherwise, if you're working in another job, where do you get the time off to do theatre? You're a slave to the thing. But with us, since we all were in Barry's theatre group, whenever there was a play on, the office was pretty much closed.
No, totally. And that's really how we started. That was our story. And till about 1995, this is what we did. Television opened up, as you all know, in the late 80s. And we started making television programs for ZTV, for Doordarshan, for BITV, for Star. And by about 1995, we had about 14 weekly, daily soap operas, food shows, game shows, Tolmol Ke Bol, Newsline, and so much more. And our colleagues at that point of time, every Saturday used to have a meeting. We used to call it the SAM, Saturday afternoon meeting, where all our producer and director colleagues used to come together. And we used to decide which actor had behaved badly or run away with somebody else. So we had to write them out of the script, or what was the focus of next week's program. And it was in one of these Saturday afternoon meetings that two of our colleagues, Sharupa, who's still with us now, and Manika, said that, we're brain dead. We can't do this anymore. And in those days, television didn't have the sense of a season. If you had a program running, then it ran every day or every week, week after week, month after month, year after year. And most of our programs were running forever because they used to get fairly decent TRPs and they were first off the block. And in a moment of foolishness, I sort of said, okay, if you're not interested in doing television anymore, let's stop and go back to our first love, which was the arts. And meanwhile, my partner, Mohit Satyanand, and Kanika, and Val Shipley, who died of COVID some last year or earlier, last year, they set up something called Friends of Music. And Friends of Music was a platform for where we said we won't have rock and we won't have Bollywood, but we'll have anything in between, anything that's experimental. And it's from that platform that whether it was Just Us, which again, Deepika was pretty much part of, all women's group, or Indian Ocean, or Parikrama, or Orange Street, or Mrigya, all of the new groups that emerged came out of this platform, which allowed for a lot of innovation and experimentation. And because Friends of Music was so successful, we decided to do the same in dance. We commissioned a lot of new work, whether it was Asta Debu. I asked Asta, I said, Asta, do something that you haven't done before. And he said, okay, can I go off to the Northeast? So he went off to the Northeast. And many of you have seen his work with the Pungcholam and the Dholcholam and the Thangta performers. We did the same with Aditi Mangal Das. We said, why don't you push the boundaries of your work, and with Daksha Sheth and with Isha, who was then a kid. And we had all of this content, and we did the same in theater. We commissioned new writing in theater. In those days, if you remember, both in Bombay and in Delhi, much of English theater was restricted to rip-offs of off-Broadway or off-West End. And there was no real new writing. And we started commissioning a new work and adaptations. Some were fantastic and were very successful, and some were horrible and won many awards. And by which time we realized that we had so much of content. And in 1995-96, my wife, Punita, had an accident. We were in Goa on our annual vacation with the kids and on a bike, and the bike skidded and she had an accident. And for a while, I hadn't cut my hair. And our eldest son one day came to me and said, are you planning to grow your hair? So I said, why? So he said, if you grow your hair, you can't come to my school. So I'm going, yes, no more parent-teacher meeting and no having to go to annual days and sports days, etc. So I grew my hair. And because my hair has always been more salt than pepper, I think a lot of people across the world sort of, I ticked that box. I spoke their language. I looked artistic. I had long hair. So I got to speak or teach or lecture at various universities across the UK in the 90s. And that really led to being able to create a network. And as I traveled to all of these festivals and different universities, I used to sit on the Arts Council of England's diversity board for theatre. I kept looking for work from India, which represented us. And I didn't see anything. I saw a lot of rubbish, and even the good work that came out, whether it was Kalakshetra or Nityagram, it was presented in this really somewhat shoddy way. And people looked at the Indian arts as, more tribal. It didn't match up to the great operas or the ballets or the symphonies. Yes, Ravi Shankar was in vogue, as was Zakir Hussain, but those were the exceptions rather than the rule. And it was in 1999-2000 in Edinburgh that we first set up our platform for work from India. And unlike what used to happen earlier, the Edinburgh Festival, because it's a number of festivals that are put together. It's 7 festivals that fall under the Edinburgh Festival umbrella. And there, if you're part of the international festival, you don't go to the fringe. If you're part of the tattoo, you don't go to the fringe or the international festival. If you're part of the literature festival, well, that's separate completely, or the science festival, or the music festival, or the film festival. What we did was we programmed across all the festivals and we marketed it under one umbrella. and talked about it as the India Showcase. And it was so successful. People came. I remember a critic, Mary Brennan, saying to me, so Sanjoy, I believe you're going to display the 7 ways that Indians stamp their feet in the name of dance. And it really riled me. This was the preeminent critic of The Guardian saying this to me. And what we then did was we flew out these critics to India prior to the launch. And I got them to tour India, go and look at rehearsals, understand the philosophy. And as a result of this education, the season that we put together in Edinburgh thereafter, 2021, 22, 23, was enormously successful and made the headlines. We got a lot of appreciation. We had people like Shah Rukh Khan coming out. And I remember the year we took Shah Rukh, I think it was in 2022, the film festival head says to me, so I said, we would like to bring Shah Rukh. And he said, yes, of course, I'll make sure that our big theater, 200-seater is going to be made available. So I said, no, it's Shah Rukh Khan. And he said, Sanjoy, we've had Brad Pitt and, Marlon Brando and so on and so forth. Don't worry. We totally understand this. And, we totally know that 200 is just the right number. So I tried to explain that, we were a fairly large, substantial diaspora, but didn't get very far. The day they released the tickets, the next day, the Times in London had a headline saying, tickets for the Edinburgh Film Festival being sold at black for Shah Rukh Khan at 100 quid for a ticket. They called hysterically and said, Sanjoy, what should we do? So I said, well, I thought you said, you wanted to sell tickets and it's all sold out. So why don't you just move it to a bigger theater? So they said, this is not possible. Our clients haven't, our regular people haven't been able to buy it. I said, well, I did warn you that he is a popular star. So they moved it to a 400-seater and restricted it that you could only buy 4 tickets at a time. And of course, it sold out in half an hour. And next day, again, there was a headline. And finally, they agreed, they moved it. They took a big venue, 1,200-seater, which is what we did. And again, it sort of exemplifies the fact that we may think our artists are huge and enormous and so on and so forth. But in those early days, India was pretty much not known for its, while everybody talked about India being an ancient culture, not much was known about the actualities and the depth and the philosophy and the diversity of what we had in India. And thereafter, as they say, once you get a Safed Chap, or I'm sorry to be sounding racist, but once you get a stamp from the UK or from the white person, the rest of it, as it said, was history. Singapore had just invested $1.3 billion into their arts infrastructure, and they invited us to come and set up shop in Singapore. That became our first international office. And I remember the then minister saying to me, so Sanjoy, now that you've set up office here, and they'd committed $5 million to us to be able to, do a lot of new festivals. He said, so what would you have achieved in 10 years? Will everybody in Singapore, play the violin or the piano or some such? So I said, Honorable Minister, the arts is such that some people may play the violin, some would play the piano, some may play football, and some would choose to do none of the above. To be able to ensure that you become a vibrant thinking society, you have to open up and allow for everybody to find their own level of competence or own interest. And as you see now, Singapore is a really vibrant place. One of the things that we said to Singapore when we were setting up shop, we said, if you want us to develop nascent thinking and innovative abilities within the arts spectrum with local people, you can't censor anything that we do. And of course, there was a huge hue and cry, and they said, that's not possible. This is the very basis of our society. So I said, no, if you control somebody's mind and not allow them to think and say that this is illegal or this is not allowed, then you're not going to allow for new thought and innovation. And to their credit, to the Singapore government's credit, for those first 5 years, they did not censor us. We had everything. We showed every kind of film, We commissioned every kind of work, everything from drugs to LGBTQI to bestiality. I mean, name it. And they stood by their decision for 5 years, and they have reaped huge benefits. Thereafter, we opened shop in Australia and New Zealand, and then Hong Kong, and back towards Europe and America and Canada. I'll give you an example of what happened in Australia. This is, again, pretty early. It was 2001. The then Minister of Interiors of Western Australia had seen some of the work that Deepika had referred to with Salam Balak Trust, which Meera Nair, Meera's mom, and I set up 33 years ago after the movie Salam Bombay, working with street children. And much of our work uses the arts as a foundation for being able to rehabilitate these children and find them a new path. And the minister sort of, in Western Australia, for those of you who don't know, the Aboriginal community, the percentage of the Aboriginal community is 2%, but their incarceration or prison strength was 98%. So you can imagine the devastation within that community. And in and around Kalgoorlie, which is the deepest mine or deepest open mine in the world, in a 100-kilometer or 100-mile radius, the incarceration rate was 100%, which meant that from an infant, so cradle to grave, you'd been in jail at some point of time. And so the Western Australian Interior Minister said to me, he said, what can we do? I want to really change this. So what we put together was we created an art installation project. We identified 10 or 11 Aboriginal communities who were nomadic in that region, in the deserts. And we went out to the elders and we said, you tell your stories of the stars, of the moons, of the rivers, of your traditions, of your myths, and you use local material to be able to do so. And to the government, we said 3 things. I said, I want this to be recorded. So we worked with the Perth University of Perth to be able to record the project, which was going to happen over 6 months. We said to the local government that you send out the dole truck, because they used to come into town for dole every Thursday. And the way the town was structured was the first building was the dole building, the next building was the supermarket, the third building was the bar, the fourth was the brothel, and the fifth was the police station. So typically, they got their dole, they got cheated in the supermarket because they have a problem with counting. They spent their money in the bar, they picked up a fight, went to the brothel, landed up in the jail. So we had the police truck, the dole truck, come out to the community with a supermarket truck and a bar, and we said restrict the number of bottles to what we called a pow, a quarter. We said only a person per week can only get 2 quarters or 3 quarters. I can't remember what it was. And over that 6-month period, which was mapped, the incarceration rate came down to 27%. And this is not rocket science, right? This is pretty much practical information, but it was it really transformed their view of the Aboriginal community. But sadly, when the project wrapped up 6 months later, and one thing that I didn't envisage is that the only way that you could see this installation was from a helicopter because it was spread across a 100-kilometer radius. It was totally stunning because they had mapped the stars, which was their southern hemisphere sky. They'd mapped their stars, and they told the story of creation 50,000 years ago, of water and lizards, which was their big, they worship the lizards and the trees, and it was absolutely stunning. But sadly, when the project wrapped up, they had a big celebration, and they appointed the first Aboriginal pediatrician. And we're talking about 2002. They appointed the first ever Aboriginal pediatrician for the Aboriginal community. And for those of you who don't know, till 1967, the Aboriginal community was labeled as flora and fauna. And if you shot a kangaroo or if you shot an Aboriginal person, you got $500. That was your reward. And it's only in 1987 did an Aboriginal person get the vote. And pretty much till 1989, if you were of mixed parentage, meaning if you were a white person who slept with an Aboriginal given birth, the child was removed to Christmas Islands, and it was a big scandal. And to come back, so when we were closing the program, the senior bureaucrat of this minister, the equivalent of the chief secretary, who was of Vietnamese origin, and her parents were of, both people from Vietnam, says to me in this closing ceremony, she says, Sanjoy, all of this is very well, but punishment is punishment. And even if when an Aboriginal comes to my car at the supermarket in Perth, I go, shoo, shoo. And that sort of stayed with me for quite a long time in terms of how do you change perception? And what is the role that the arts can do to change perception? And that sort of took us on a trajectory of how we could use knowledge and information to be able to change people's viewpoint. Before I come to how that sort of played out, the other example I wanted to use was in South Africa. Again, this is, I think, 2004, 2005. The South African government in Gauteng, in Johannesburg, reached out to our ambassador and said, can you ask Sanjoy to come out here? And, we really need to look at how Newtown can get back its wealth. What had happened is after the apartheid regime had fallen and independence had come about in South Africa opened up and all of Africa arrived there. The bus station, the central bus station was in Johannesburg. So a lot of people came in there from other poorer parts of Africa to find a job or a way of life. And because there wasn't that kind of stuff, it led to a huge amount of crime. And what happened in Newtown, which was their central business district, is everybody moved out to what we now know as Sandton. And there were only two banks left, First National, FNB, and Standard Bank. And they told the city that if you don't get this sorted out, we will move, and that will be the end of this central business district. So initially, when Ambassador Navdeep Suri called out to me, I was like, there's no way I'm going to South Africa. There's no flatbread. There's no direct flight. Anyway, he said, no, just come for a day because, they really need some help. So anyway, I did fly in finally via Air Ethiopia and went around, understood their problem. And it was heartbreaking to see what had happened to multitudes of different races of Black South Africa. And what really came home to me at that point of time is that South Africa had an average of 7 guns or 7 weapons to a person. That was the per capita guns, because their whole DNA was about confrontation, about trying to have a standoff with the law because of the white apartheid regime. And when the regime stepped down, not everybody, I think about 70% of weapons were put in, but 30% remained. So kind of mayhem and bloodshed was just enormous. You couldn't go out of your house without the fear of being shot or being carjacked or whatever. So what we said to the South African or the Johannesburg, Gauteng province government is, I said, why don't you delineate an arts district? And this is something that we'd done in America, in New York, in the late 80s with the then mayor, etc. And I said, delineate an arts district here. And I promise you that in 3 years' time, I will walk across Mary Fitzgerald Square with my mobile phone and I won't be mugged. And I said, the only 2 things that you need to do is ensure great street lighting and ensure great policing. As it happens, Stephen Sachs, who was the head of the city at that point of time, bought into this vision. They delineated an arts district around Mary Fitzgerald Square, where the Africa Museum now sits. We were able to redevelop the old power house into a conference center. We were able to attract galleries and the LGBTQ community, music spaces, restaurants. Today, it's a vibrant hub. And we set into place a number of festivals in Mary Fitzgerald Square. Again, none of what I'm saying is rocket science. This is stuff that, one has seen playing out across the world. In the UK, when I was part of the Arts Council of England Diversity Commission, some of you will remember there was a riot in London at one point of time. Huge riots had broken out. And in our meeting, because the city just completely freaked out, they'd never seen riots before in that sense. They were very worried. And all we said is, why don't you map the community centers and the art centers that you've shut down to the places where the riots have happened, whether it was in Brixton or in Southall or in Dulwich or wherever. And they all looked at me like I was mad. And I said, humor me. The only one thing that I'm asking you, I'm saying, just map this and present the report. When the map came back, when the mapping happened and 3 months later they came back, it was an exact match. In every location or locality where they said, shut the art center or the community center, the young people who came there, protection from the street, protection from their families, and came to find their world, to discover their talent. They had no other place to go to but back on the streets. And we see this playing out again and again and again across the world, that the arts continues to be the first place that governments make budgetary cuts on, without understanding the kind of wealth, both tangible and intangible, that the arts is able to contribute to society and to development. To cut the long story short, it was in Edinburgh that Faith and John Singh from Anokhi, they had come out to see what we were doing in Edinburgh in 2001. And John had been very motivated to look at built heritage and how do you preserve built heritage in Jaipur and in the old city of Amer, because people were pulling down their old buildings and rebuilding new fancy glass and steel structures. And when John saw the work in Edinburgh, where much of what happens in Edinburgh is you put the festival, you put the arts events into built heritage buildings, old churches, old buildings, etc., and you create a value for that. And they were very excited, and they said, would you like to do this in Jaipur? And I'm like, no, we wouldn't like to do it, but we're happy to advise you. So we advised them and we helped them set up a festival, which was the Jaipur Virasat Heritage Festival. But unfortunately, places like Jaipur live in many centuries at the same time, and they have their own politics, and that festival didn't go any place. And a couple of years later, John and Faith sort of said, you have to rescue your baby. You can't let it die. So there was a literature program within that Namita and William used to program. So we took that out of the Jaipur Virasat Festival and created what is now known as the Jaipur Literature Festival, with its iterations across the world. And unlike what Harvard Business School's case study teaches about us, which says that we're a 5-year and a 10-year and a 15-year plan to take over the world, none of the above. Much of what we've done has been accidental. It's really about being in the right time, in the right place. And like I said, our whole purpose when we set up this new program was to ensure the free flow of knowledge and information. And I was very clear that if we have to bring about any change in society, with all its evils and all its shortcomings, then the only way to do it is through the free flow of knowledge and information. And Jaipur really became that. And we were very clear that we wanted to focus it on young people. Hundreds of thousands of young people stream through our doors, and a lot of older people say, why do you allow them in? And this is not for them. And I'm like, this is in fact only for them. Because if we can bring about change, and if we can change a mindset and open their minds through literature and writing and reading, that is what we do. And I'll give you another example of how this changed. So pretty much into the third or the fourth year in Jaipur, once the festival picked up, and it picked up for a number of reasons. We were in Jaipur, great romantic place of palaces and forts. We used to have wonderful dinners and great music, and the world used to come to party there. Of course, we used to have the most incredible speakers and writers, fantastic food, great retail therapy. It sort of made for a festival city. And for us, it was, how do we make it sexy? Which is the reason all of these other elements became part of the Jaipur Literature Festival. It wasn't just an India Habitat Center or India International Center or a Wellington Club sort of soiree of people coming to listen to an author and then running off. It was meant to be an immersive experience. And it was after 4 years, I think it was the year before Oprah Winfrey arrived, that we put in place security for the first time. It was a weekend, Saturday. I received people for about an hour at the entrance every day. And we open our gates at 7:30 in the morning, for those of you who don't know. And as I was standing there, a man and a boy came through the gates of Diggy Palace. And they looked like they didn't belong, and the security stopped them. And because I was there, I went up and I said, Bhaiya, or, can I help you? And the man said, I sleep on the pavement up the road in front of the SMS hospital. And I know that I'll never be able to send my son to school, nor be able to afford to buy a book for him. But I thought that if he heard a story, it would change his life forever. And that's the reason I brought him, and I'm really sorry. And, and he turned to go, and I said, no, it is for you. And for us, again, the indication that somebody like that could step through the gates of Diggy Haveli, Diggy Palace, in itself was transformational. And a few years later, I remember meeting a very tall, very well-dressed, good-looking gentleman, completely white kurta, dhoti with a white pagri. And he said, I come from a village 40 kilometers from Gorakhpur, and I've been following everything that you all do. I used to be the teacher in this village. I'm so motivated. I want to go back and set up a library in my village. In 2020, which was our last physical festival, he returned with 12 other people. And they come by train. They live on the railway station in the waiting room for 5 days, and they come every morning to the festival. And he introduced me to these other people, and he said, we are now 12 villages, and we have 12 libraries where we read books to people who can't read. And what was amazing was this New Year's Eve, I was in Diggy Fort, which was 2 hours away from Jaipur, soaking in the sun and nursing a gin and tonic, more than one. And at night on New Year's Eve, this very traditional family who I've known, Gajanan, he is the personal secretary to Vasundhara. His wife and new daughter-in-law were dancing there. And I was stunned. And I went up to Gajanan and I said, just congratulations. I'm just stunned to see in today's day and age, your wife and your daughter-in-law dancing together in a public space. And his son said to me, he said, sir, 10 years before, this would have been unthinkable in our family. We are Brahmins, and it wouldn't even have been considered as a possibility. He said, you all don't know what the Literature Festival has done. It's opened our minds and changed our lives. Whether it's the chanewala or the juttiwala or the jeweler or the regular Joe on the street, it's changed our lives. And that, I think, is what really the legacy of what we do is. It's not so much about the Jaipur Literature Festival or teamwork or what I or my colleagues do. The fact that today there are 330 odd festivals, everything from the Berkeley Bay Area Festival in California all the way to Ubud or Australia, who've taken inspiration from what we've done to be able to set up their own festivals. 133 odd festivals in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka alone. And that every town and city and village may have the potential and the possibility of having a platform for their creative artists, for their writers, for their storytellers, for their incredible, for the stories from the earth, which are so amazing. And I'll close with an example. So Manoranjan Vyapari from Bengal. Manoranjan Vyapari came away as a refugee from Bangladesh, etc. Lived in the refugee camps in the early 70s, was molested by a person who he then proceeded to murder, runs away, joins the Naxal movement, and of course murders a lot of people, lands up in prison, is arrested, lands up in prison. The prison superintendent takes a shine to him and keeps him protected so he's not killed off in an encounter. And while he's in prison, he learns to read and write by reading the signs on the wall and using a stick in the mud, in the sand, in the prison. And while he's there, he reads 200 books. He's rehabilitated. He leaves prison. He's given a rickshaw to pull. And one day, a lady gets onto his rickshaw and he's reading a particular book. And he asks the lady, says, do you know the meaning of this word? And the lady says, yes, and this is the meaning. And she says, where have you come across such a difficult word in Bengali? So he says, I'm reading Mahashweta Devi's book. So she said, really? She said, show me the book. So when they get off and they've now reached their destination, she gets off. He pulls out the book from under the seat and she says, that's amazing, and asks him his story. He tells him his story across, and she says, I am Mahashweta Devi and I will help you publish your story. And she goes on to publish his first story. Fast forward to the Jaipur Literature Festival 2016, Manoranjan Vyapari's book about his life story is now ready. It's in Bengali. He comes. We have a program called Words of Bridges, which looks at translations. He and I surreptitiously are traveling together to our closing our writers' ball. I'll tell you, is a very fancy, fabulous event in the evening where the world comes to. And with me is the Washington Post reporter and the New York Times reporter. Because I'd run out of conversation, I sort of turned to them and I said, do you know Manoranjan Vyapari's story? And I've always loved Manoranjan. I found him really feisty and what a life he's led. And I told them his story. A few months later, it was a half a page in the New York Times and the Washington Post. He came back in 2020 with his English translation, and his rights had been sold in 11 languages. Mamta appointed him gave him a ticket from Howrah, which he went on to win. And he used to be the cook in a school. So instead of being a cook in the school, the job that he was given post that was being the head of the libraries, government libraries in schools across Bengal. I'm giving you these examples purely to show you how transformational the arts can be. And we keep forgetting in our everyday world of going out there that this is what distinguishes us. This is what creates the empathy. When you talk about my way or the highway, and we see this today so much more, not just in the United States, but primarily in India and Indonesia, and so many places where you have didactic rulers, not necessarily ruling by the law, but ruling by their personality. What the arts does is allows you a representation of different truths. And it's not about choosing this truth from the other truth. Truths can sit together. And your truth or Deepika's truth are all true. It's our perception. And what does it do for young people? It allows them to be able to think outside of the box, and it allows them to innovate. In India, as we all know, we have jugaad, which is make do. But I look at jugaad differently. I look at jugaad as a future prospect of make possible. In America, if a spacecraft wasn't going up, there'd be a committee and it takes 9 months to discover. In India, if something didn't go up, 3 people would run across, open something, put it together and make possible. When you bring both these philosophies together, and I'm using the word philosophy very specifically, when you bring them together and you bring them in the context of our heritage, of our built heritage, of our intangible heritage, of our diversity, where every 100 kilometer, everything changes. The way you make your dal, the way you tie your sari, your language, your definition, the way you celebrate Holi or Ram Leela or whatever it is, everything changes. And yet, it allows you to bind yourself together in this larger philosophy, this larger whole of being empathetic, of being a good human, of dharma, not in the way that dharma is being used today, but in the traditions and the foundations of the multiplicity and the syncretic traditions that we understand is what India represents. And that's really what the arts. So arts is not about song and dance, and of course it is. And, you go to the NCPA or you go to the local community center. It's much more than that. And the sad thing, and I'm going to end on a sad, tragic note, which is sadness is in this pandemic. Even as every politician and every corporate head honcho sort of mouthed their great appreciation of the arts, nothing was done to help the artist and the artisan. And all of us must remember that if they don't perform or if they don't create a piece of work or sell their ware, well, that night they don't eat. We had asked government pretty much early in 2020 in April, we said, the artists and artisans need your help. Can't the state governments buy the produce of the artisans, keep it as part of your state emporia till when you open up or put it online, and give them money for the inventory that they have? And similarly with the artists, we said to governments, we said, invite them to open air spaces, record them, put it out digitally, give them a token, a royalty against that because they won't eat. It didn't happen. And I remember in a conversation that I had in one of the task forces pretty much early after lockdown, I was asked by a minister, Sanjay ji, you keep talking about artists and artisans needing money. Why do artists need money? Ask them to contribute to the PM Scare Fund. And I thought he was pulling, yanking my chain, pulling my leg. And then I realized they actually thought that every artist was a Shah Rukh Khan or a Sonu Nigam. And they didn't get that in India, we had 400 million people who are either receive a primary or a secondary income from the arts, whether it's the ragi in the Gurdwara, the candle maker, the flower person, the caterer. All of these people are dependent. And the other thing, for all of your information, NCPA did a recent survey since Bruce came in, where they found that to put even one artist onto stage, you need 33 people. The stage manager, the designer, the person who will pull the curtain, the janitor, the front of house, the cleaner. And in this, again, we've forgotten that these are people who need our support. Artists did get some support, but these people got none. And in fact, it was at the end of the second wave, one day at 7:30 in the morning, my phone rings, and I normally don't take any call till 10 o'clock because it's my time. But I did because it seemed to be urgent. It was an unknown number. And this gentleman said, I'm sorry I've called you, but my wife died in COVID and I have two daughters. I used to be a dancer at the Sri Ram Bharatiya Kala Kendra, and I used to design costumes. For 18 months, I've had no work. And last night I was going to kill myself, kill my daughters, and then kill myself. And then I thought that if I kill myself within these four walls, nobody will know the plight of artists and artisans. So I decided I will kill myself publicly. And I've announced this, that I'll kill myself at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And everybody who I said this to said, if I had to make a difference, I needed to have you endorse my suicide. Now you can imagine 7:30 in the morning is, anyway, my mind doesn't function. I didn't know whether this was a crank call, it was a real call. I immediately Googled, he had announced his suicide on Facebook. I explained to him that, millions had died already and the government had not necessarily been empathetic. In fact, in UP, they denied the fact that anybody died of the lack of oxygen. So I said, what difference will it make? And why must you do this to your daughters? While speaking to him, I got Punita to call, and we sent a counselor across to his house. I was able to raise a couple of lakhs very quickly in a half an hour, transfer it to him, and saved his, or at least got him to think differently. And I'm sharing this example with you just so that you all understand the desperation that artists and artisans have been going through. And now with the new advent, with everything shutting down, I just had an artist who came in, needing help and support. We started something called Art Matters, which was an advocacy program to explain to people work about the art, but we pretty quickly made it into a funding program. We sort of supported 5,900 artists and artisans since then. But this is a drop in the ocean. Everybody has to step out and do more, whatever it is, the smallest amount. It's our responsibility. When Nitin Gadkari said to me, I've opened up the MG Nareka scheme for artists and artisans, I said, Nitinji, it takes a million times of doing something to be able to build muscle memory. So to get the finest weave, or to get a brass diya, or even to make the humble diya, a clay diya, you and I, if we were to try and do it on the wheel, we'd never be able to do it. It takes time and muscle memory to be able to do it. And I said, you're going to expect them to dig wells and dig roads. You'll destroy the muscle memory, and you'll destroy our entire cultural ethos. Please don't do it. Instead, reach out to these people, again, buy their products, buy their produce. And I think that's our responsibility as people who work within the larger world of the arts, and people who share knowledge and information, people who are influential like yourselves. Please, wherever you are, it doesn't matter, reach out to the local potter. We are a creative race. Everybody, the poorest of the poor, will sing a song, tell a story, celebrate a wedding, celebrate an event, and have a talent. We get tens of thousands of people reaching out to us, and we are committed, or we continue to be committed, to create that platform for young people, because I think we have failed them. The future is theirs. We failed the planet, but perhaps by creating these platforms, we will be able to, somewhere in the future, few decades later, have a better society, a more empathetic society, a society which understands the needs and the requirements of how you need to feed not just your stomach, but you need to feed your soul and your mind. And the arts and literature and theater and music and textiles and paintings and visual arts and everything, all of this contributes to this. So thank you so much, Deepika, for putting this together, for bringing us all together in this. I know many of you are doing a lot of work in this area, and more power to each of you. And I hope we can continue in our advent to create wonderful work.
Yes, in fact, what you said, Sanjoy, about people not realizing how many people get employment through the arts. Right now, I'm at a shoot, so I just requested them to give me an hour off, and I'm sitting in their office. Normally, this shoot would have had at least 100 people on it. But now the makeup men have not been given assistance. The hairdresser does not have an assistant. The person who does istri is doing it alone. He does not have an assistant. All these people are without work. When you see a movie, you see all those names scrolling by. All of them have lost their employment. Anyway, so
I just wanted, so we commissioned British Council, and a whole lot of people commissioned this report on the contribution of Durga Puja to Bengal's economy. And the report sort of states that 32,377 crores is the contribution of Durga Puja to Bengal's economy. It's the single biggest contributor to the local GDP of Bengal. So it's not just intangible. And we know, for example, at the Jaipur Literature Festival, Jaipur receives about 110 crores of additional spend over 5 days. And this was a research by E&Y about five years ago. So that number would have risen. So it totally, economically, it makes enormous sense. But sadly, we don't have a lot of people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sanjoy, for that absolutely awe-inspiring meeting. Any art form needs a patron and a platform. And you have taken Indian art and culture and showcased it so beautifully all across the world. And not only do you promote the arts, but the way you have helped artists during these troubled times is truly commendable. This meeting, I'm sure, has been quite an eye-opener for people, because most people don't realize the impact of the arts and the way it can help to transform society. So more power to you, Sanjoy. Keep up with your wonderful work and all the best. Thank you so much for this awe-inspiring meeting.
Thank you all and best wishes and stay safe. And I hope, inshallah, we'll all meet at one of our many festivals.
Yes. A big
Jaipur,
hand
here
to
we come.
Sanjoy, everybody. A big
Thank
hand.
you. A big
Thank
clap
you.
and a salute to you, young man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thanks so much, Sanjoy.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Stay safe. Bye.